we have found the presence of the God Self, the Holy Spirit, within us, because that's the only real place that it exists. Well, I have a suggestion from Brother. Wanted me to suggest that during this next week, for each of us to inquire of our God Self what will be necessary to induce our willingness to surrender to God. That for next week, it would be a lovely idea for us to, in all of our encounters, just remind ourselves. Now remember, as you go into this encounter, sin is not real. Now remember, sin is not real. Even though it may not appear to be a confrontive or a conflicting type of experience, just whatever the experience is, just remind yourself. Now remember, sin is not real. Now remember, sin is not real. I will tell you this though, that in the years that I have studied the Course, it is no accident that it is used as frequently as it is. Even though I might not like it, that it might have a tendency to raise feelings of guilt and so forth. It's there for a reason. And anytime I'm not comfortable with it being there, I need to find out why. Well, Doyle, let's examine your question about special relationships.
Okay, yeah, I'd just like to hear from the group what constitutes that special relationship, and why does the Course kind of guard against it? What about that?
How do you see a special relationship? Think about some of the special relationships you have, and how do they help or hinder you? You can have a special love relationship as much as you can have a special hate relationship. Most of it is derived from the meaning that you give it. The Course talks to us particularly about a special relationship being one in which we take into that relationship the expectation of something that will make us whole.
Okay, yeah.
Something seems to be missing in me. And so I search for relationships that will seem to fill that gap. So think about the special love relationships that you might have. And ask yourself whether or not that relationship was an appreciation for two whole people coming together, or whether or not you had the expectation that it would in some way be able to help you heal.
If you had the expectation for someone to help you heal, would that be minimizing and not be a good thing?
It's doomed to fail. That's the most important thing we can say about it, Doyle. What inevitably happens in a relationship that you enter into thinking that it will make up for something missing in you is that you'll discover that it doesn't. And the moment it doesn't, it then negates the relationship. And so the purpose you've given it, i.e. the purpose of fulfilling you, is missing. The teaching of A Course in Miracles is all about oneness, separation and oneness. And it uses the concept of special relationships to show how we many times use our relationships to prevent the possibility of oneness ever being accepted. Because we're always giving somebody some kind of purpose to do that for us. And so we keep ourselves away from it. So to see that everyone is a part of me, then the relationship I have with them changes enormously. Then if I think, oh, that person can really help me to find this wholeness that is missing within me.
I was looking for somebody to supply the love that I feel that I didn't have or couldn't get to.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. I'm beginning to understand what this means by the special relationship. Now, it's a replacement. that relationship turns out to be a replacement, we think, for divinity. So that's warning against that. Okay.
For the oneness.
Yeah.
The mind did not create the body. The mind created an experience of separation that it calls, as proof of its validity, the body. That's why Jesus makes the statement, the body does not exist. See, mind cannot create form, but it can create the experience of separateness, and we call that form.
Would it be fair to say the mind can create the belief in form?
Yes. If the body were real, it would mean that we could create a reality of something that denied the existence of oneness. And that would destroy whatever the Course is teaching us. So all we're dealing with here is the creation of an experience. So now you're having difficulty with making sense of the thing called oneness. How much validity do you give to the possibility of being able to love anyone for anything at any time? Once the thought first comes into your mind that you have the ability to love unconditionally and can love unconditionally, the desire that follows that will immediately create a sense of oneness in your mind, because you will want to love, period. Anything, everything, all things. Nothing is unlovable. The other thing to remember is that whatever is natural with you, you do know. It's nothing for you to learn or get a hold of later. It's in you now. And because you are one and a part of everything, that knowledge is within you now. The easiest way to keep it away is to try to figure out what it is. Because you are going against that trend, you see, of the ego mind denying itself. To recognize that your wholeness is not an issue, just let it be. Truly, just let it be. If it is truth, you can't do anything about it. If it's not truth, you can't do anything about it. That's about the closest we can come within the realm of our perception. The one that normally is the biggest trouble, Jim, is the Donald Trump. The one that we can say, well, I can learn to love him. That's it. Now you've completely lost it. What is love? What is love? If there's an opposite to it, you've missed it. I can remember one time when Brother said it to me a little stronger than that. He said, you hadn't better do anything. It was humorous, but
yes,
the point was well taken, that if I do want to understand, I simply let it be. Everything that you think you need to know is what keeps you from knowing it. See, this is what we're talking about here. This is the whole purpose, entirely the purpose that God created the Holy Spirit and put it in our mind. Because now we've got a place that we can go. What do you think you see when you see the vision that the Holy Spirit holds of you? Do you think you see someone who is really learning well? Or do you think you simply see the perfectly created, unchangeable child of God? For if he be the sum of everything, what is not a part of God? How can we not be a part of something that is the sum of everything? Just ask Brother what would be a good thing for us to do, and he said, ask what is the one thing that would make you unlovable. As though we're gaining territory or having new insights. Or if we are, it's not because we're learning, let's say, something more. It's simply because we're tuning into, if I can use that expression, the awareness of what already exists in our mind. And to think that we need to rely upon a guru or upon a written text, that's convenient, but unnecessary. Inasmuch as we can think of a path being something, yes. But the point here that we're really trying to make is that we've never really left God. And so this awareness coming to us then is coming because of our desire to have it. So this is really important to us, not to know, or to know that we don't have to rely upon something, some other source. That at any time we can simply step back and be quiet. Let's remind ourselves again, what is God? What is God except the sum total of everything that he created? So what stands apart from that? What isn't already aware? Nothing. What would happen right now, Kelly, right this moment, if you sat Denny's son down in front of you and just said to him, with all of your heart, I love you. Everything else is irrelevant. Totally. Everything else is irrelevant. I love you. Now, in the back of your mind, you could be thinking, well, my goodness, why would I say that when his mind is not open to receiving it? Is there anything true about you or about him that is unloving?
Not really, no.
No. We are the extension of the love of God. That's what creation is. It's the extension of the Creator. The Creator is the presence of love. Everything extended from that becomes an experience of love. That's all it is. Would you like to know that? Well, look at the wonderful opportunity that you had just to look him in the eye and say, you know, your story is irrelevant, meaning my story is irrelevant, and I love you. But you're wrong. That's okay. I love you. Just that. Just let love be what it is and watch what happens. Brother tells us, I don't know how many times in this course, more time than we can imagine. If we will first, number one, come to the awareness that nothing happens to us by accident, that everything that comes into our experience is simply a mirror for what's going on in our perception. And everything that's going on there that is unloving is an opportunity to be loving. That's why the Course says, see everything as a call for love or an expression of love. Because nothing else is there. The reason that it is so important for us to practice listening is so that when circumstances like that arise, we're not left in the lurch. We're not left thinking, oh my God, how could I, you've already established the link, the communication between yourself and your God self. And so then, even in our moments of desperation, we can simply say, help me, help me, help me. And it will be there. And we will know it is there. And we will find it. But that only happens after we have practiced on all of the insignificant times when it doesn't seem to be needed.
And then you say, watch what happens. Would it be more of watching what happens within you than what's going on out there?
That's all we ever see, anything like
Okay.
that. We think that it's going on out there. We think it's an event in the world and so forth, but what do we call it, a manifestation of the thoughts in our mind. So do it now, Cameron. Maybe not right this moment. You can if you like, but anytime, really. Anytime is an opportunity for healing. And when I say watch what happens, I'm saying wait for the peace that comes, and it will. This world and the myriad of things we see happening in it are all simply illustrations of what happens when we forget that we are a part of God. In other words, when we forget that we are the presence of love. Because as soon as we have denied that, my goodness, I watch my own mind and I think how creative I must be, because there's always something, some new way that my consciousness has of convincing me that something is wrong. And it could be just a momentary forgetting, pretending, being asleep, dreaming, feeling that I am away from being connected to the presence of love. And then all of the other opportunities that want to present themselves are going to show up. Because that's what we made this world to do. But the Holy Spirit says, look, there is a way to use that to your advantage. Because each one of those that you can tick off by saying, no, I love you, are going to save you how many lifetimes of needing to do the same thing later. There's an interesting question that it would be beneficial for us to examine. One of the things the Course says to us is that it is, in fact, God's will that we be perfectly happy. Perfectly happy. What is that? What is that happiness? What would it be for you? Or do I simply say, well, since God knows what makes me happy better than I, why, I'll just trust? Yes, that would be grand. But how often do we do that? How often do we say, just as you were pointing out in your relationship issue with Denny's son, do you know what would have made you happy in that circumstance? Do you know that simply by saying to him, I love you, would have been enough to make you happy? Pretty easy to forget, isn't it?
It's the internal, I love you.
It's the only one there is, isn't it? So, any ideas from the rest of you? Well,
Yeah, I have an idea. It seems like when you say you're directing that message to him, it's not to the him that's demonstrating this behavior. It's to the him that's behind that.
yes, that's so true, Roger. That's so true.
And you're trying to connect.
And you do. That used to be the predominant belief. Children came in and they were very happy until they discovered what the world was all about, and then they grew cynical and angry and like the rest of us. That's not so true. That's not so true anymore. It was true before our awareness, our consciousness began to change. But that's not true so much anymore. Most children who are coming through very, very aware. You see, the changes that we have made in our consciousness are being reflected everywhere in the consciousness so naturally. The child that comes in now, he's not looking for the same thing that you and I looked for when we came in. There's a property of integrity in the feeling of love that is unlike anything else. And it reaches out to itself. It reaches out to itself because in truth that's all there is. Isn't that amazing to think of? Look at the world that we think we see now. And all of the turmoil and the hatred and the killing and my goodness, all of the stuff that we see going on. How can we say to ourselves, The only thing that's real behind any of that is the experience of loving.
Like young women growing up, most women have had some type of inappropriate expression from a man, you know, at all different levels.
Let's take a look at that from a slightly different perspective. What you say it's been brought up now, so that's an advantage. What would you say would be the ideal outcome of it being brought to the consciousness, forward in the consciousness now? What would be the ideal outcome?
A deep healing and a conscious awareness of, whoa, like the scales and how to bring it back to a place of respect.
To where everything was equal?
That's right, balance.
Okay, what made it unequal to begin with?
Fear. I mean,
Fear of,
survival.
might it not be more helpful
Mm-hmm.
if the outcome were to be for all women to look within themselves and say, you know, there has never been a need for me to see myself less than a man. Now, that may sound as though I'm being a little demeaning, but what I'm really saying is that the best outcome must always be your self-empowerment. And to know that you have never been a victim, that any woman ever, anywhere, has ever been a victim of anything, must be the most perfect outcome possible. No man, anywhere, can impose his will upon anyone does not welcome the event. Each, whether it's a man or a woman, each of us has to ask our own internal guidance. How do I see this in the way that heals my perception of it? What is the ideal perception of anything? That we are all loved and loved completely. Because that's the truth. That represents, or that is the description of our nature. We are the experience of loving. We are the experience of loving. So to arrive at that point is the most ideal healing for anything that says something else is possible. I'm not saying or suggesting for a moment that it's ever acceptable for a man or a woman to feel unloving toward another. Never. That's never a good excuse. But simply to take away your power by having a man say, well, we've been responsible for this and we're going to stop being responsible for it, doesn't heal. What heals is for you to come into that sense of empowerment, knowing how loved you are. We were all to accept the simple phrase, I am as God created me. That solves it all. Whether we're a man or a woman or a field mouse, I am as God created me. It takes away all of the subterfuge.
And if I am as God created me, would there be a gender difference?
No.
No. Gender.
None. None. There wouldn't be a plant or an animal.
Not a body. Yeah.
It's another reason almost just to get angry, of course. I mean, we can use any
It
reason.
is, of course it is, because all of it results in your still feeling a lack of empowerment. The only thing that's going to change that is for you to look inside and see the child of God. That's it. That's it for all of us, regardless of what we think the question was. Love is the only answer. How many times do you ask to see something in a different way? That's really what you're saying, is that you're kind of stuck in the old mold. And you will be until you teach yourself by practicing a different way of seeing. let yourself have some meditations that are very expressive of what it feels like just to be in the presence of love. Begin by imagining yourself perhaps meditating with a bunch of people that you know love you. And then let that expand a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, until maybe one day it dawns on you. You could include everybody. Just feel the sensation of what it's like to be totally defenseless. If there's one person in the world that you could ever think of that doesn't deserve to be loved, guess who that's going to be? Brother tells us that there's a light in us that our perception can't see. And he says that that light is the love of God, that what Jesus was talking about, I'm sure. The light being a reflection of the love of God. And he says the reason it's important for us, he says even though we can't see it, we don't see it doesn't mean we can't see it. And the reason that's so important for us is that that's how we see the entire world. Through this, either through the eyes of love, the love of God, or through the perception of the ego. And how would the world change if we saw it through the eyes of being loved, through the love of God? How would the world change? This crazy world that we're seeing now, it's not fixed. It's not there. It's in here. And how would it change if what is in here changed? I remember it's got to be 20, 25 years ago. I remember for the first time reading when I was reading one of the Papaji books, and he described a dream that he had like that, and I thought, oh my God, you mean you never get over that? I mean, this was a very enlightened being. And so I've had several discussions with Brother about when I have dreams like that, about where they come from and so forth. There's a very fine line between understanding, for instance, what Brother says in Lesson 135, what could you not accept if you but knew all things are gently planned for one whose only purpose is your good. You understand that loving intention, and then something like that appears, and you say, oh my goodness, where could this have come from? Could this have been planned for me? Was this my thought? And I'm sure you must have struggled with that mightily. Because it seems that when something comes into our individual so-called experience, that it is our thought that is bringing that to us. But how would that change if we recognized that we didn't have any private thoughts in reality? If every thought that existed anywhere in the one mind, anywhere, any thought, if we reached out and somehow, for whatever reason, got a hold of it and brought it in and then experienced it as our personal thought, just look how we shy away from that. We cringe and look for ways never to have that happen again. But what if we believed that the thought of sin was not real? What if we truly believed that nothing real could be threatened? Now, you see, now we would have a different opportunity, even in our dreams. We would have the opportunity to say, wait a minute, this need not be. This horror that is arising in the mind need not be. And we could begin to change it. But we haven't yet gotten ourselves to the point where we will even allow ourselves a moment's respite from what our ego, our guilty self, says must be real. How can we learn to do it differently? Well, I want to suggest that it's about time that we learned to start seeing everything, all thoughts that we have, as being shared thoughts. If in my quiet moments, when I was appealing to what to me is our loving Creator, if I would have the feeling that it wasn't just me there, but that I was bringing there all of creation with me, I would be thinking and identifying myself as that creation, not as the individual that seemed to be doing one thing or another. Are we a part of God? Is our brother a part of us? I mean, are these just words? Or is this the truth? And if it is the truth, then why don't we start behaving like that? Why don't we incorporate that as part of our thinking? When I want something, why don't I want it for everyone? When I see a sense of loving in the world, why don't I have the idea that I can accept that for everyone? When I see a brother who's having a terrible time accepting himself, rather than trying to preach to him, why don't I just accept for him the fact that he is lovable, that he is the Son of God? Would that be out of the question of truth, or would that be the truth? How can I, on the one hand, say, my brother is a part of me and together we are a part of God, and at the same time say, well, he's got to learn his lessons and I have to learn mine? So you see, the fine line is whether or not our intention seems to evolve from the story I'm telling, or whether my intention comes from that other place, that God-self place, and speaks to the greater awareness of who we all are. How long are we going to just continue to be satisfied with understanding what we're reading before we become willing to say, wait a minute, maybe I could start living my life like this? I wonder when Jesus says, let me be close enough to love you. I wonder what his motive was. I think one of the things that makes it, unconsciously makes it most difficult for us to accept this one mind business. Just stop for a moment and ask yourself how willingly you would invite somebody into your mind. Would you be a little tentative, thinking that maybe there might be a thing or two there that you weren't too crazy about sharing?
Can't imagine a soul on earth who would want to go there.
But if they knew you, who would not feel infinitely loved being there? Who is it that gives the meaning to our dreams? Why couldn't my dreams, your dreams, be seen as corrective measures, as loving corrective measures? Why are they automatically interpreted by the ego? It's just me, it's just my desire to have it that way that makes it that way. And you've obviously decided you don't want it that way anymore. I'm not ever trying to change something for me, except in my story. Changing something individually changes nothing, except it rearranges the story. It makes the story look different, but it changes nothing. When we choose a thought on behalf of, let's say, everyone, now we're talking about the ability to change, because we're in the realm of where creation began. You see what I'm saying? Thoughts made, decisions made, choices made as an individual affect only the individual story, but they don't change anything.
Sounds almost like you're talking about forgiveness and requires communication with the Holy Spirit.
Exactly, Roger. That's exactly what we are talking about. So when you go to the Holy Spirit, where, in your mind, what are you doing? You're going to the presence of the all that is. You don't think of the Holy Spirit as being your Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit of everybody. And when we do go there, and we ask for help to make our choices, we are given that help from that perspective. So why don't we just adopt that as a default attitude in the beginning? It is my intention. Incidentally, try to have an unloving intention for everybody. You can't get away with it. And the reason for that's very simple. It's because we are the only ones we condemn. The Course says that one of the first things that it tries to teach us is how to redefine what we see. So when a thought just comes because it's in the one mind somewhere, doing something, it comes. And all of a sudden, wham, there it is. What if, instead of condemning it, I saw it as a call for love? What if I redefined it? Would I push it away if I saw a call for love? Or would I be encouraged to ask what to do with it in a loving way? I remember the first time Brother mentioned to me, make it a practice to want for everybody what you want for yourself. The first thing that came into my mind was, well, what about the times that I really think I should be crucified? What about the times I really judge myself poorly? Do I want that for everybody? No. This is a beautiful thing to try because it exposes a lot. Do that. Want something for everyone, and then allow that thought, that ego thought, to come into your mind. Well, but would I want to crucify everyone? And just see what your reaction is. You will, I guarantee you, you will not allow yourself to go down that road. So it works even then, because you cannot want bad things for everyone. That's what exposes the loving side. That's what brings us in touch with the Christ side of the split mind. Every loving thought is a thought that joins you with your brother, with God, with whatever, but it joins you. Every judgmental thought is the thought that separates you, and that's the distinction. So, what is the difference between a loving and a judgmental thought? One that joins versus separates. If we want to stop the war, the hatred, the killing in the world, we first must know what caused it. And what caused it is the guilty image of a guilty self. That's what we're trying to acknowledge here. It's what we always try to acknowledge. Now, once we have acknowledged that it is because it is our own thoughts, then how do we change those thoughts? Except to take them to the God self, to the part of ourself that knows what needs to be changed and how to do it. So we go there and we say, show me. And we try to listen when that presence says, now, don't judge your neighbor for doing this. Don't judge that person that seemed to be driving too fast in front of you. Don't judge this and don't judge that. Tell yourself instead, this world is not real. That what's happening is that I am having an experience of my thoughts. And I'm trying to allow those thoughts to coalesce in a broader way so that they can become a choice for our consciousness rather than just what I, as an individual, seem to be able to see. So show me how to do that. Show me how to get to the cause, be willing to release it, and become an instrument for change. Show me how literally to accept that sin is not real, so that I can allow God to be close enough to me to feel His love, to feel His presence, and to know that I am His loving child. Then what do I see that makes a world? Now it's transformed into something else. Now it's no longer a world where hate is the only alternative. Something else is present. I was so struck when he was talking about the love of God, the light of the world. There is a light in you that the world cannot discern. And a little later on in the lesson when he says, were you to accept the love of God, everything would change. Everything. The whole world would just, that you now see, would just disappear. Everything would change. And yet how can I accept the love of God until I am willing to give it?
I have a hard time with saying, I know we're all one. But if I can go to and say, I am one with God, and I invite you to be one with God with me, then I can feel the concept a little bit better. Do you have any insight?
Well, it is hard. It's intellectual, you know, at best, because here we are, looking for all of the world like we're separate. Mm-hmm. So all of our attempts, or my attempts at least, have always seemed to be rather intellectual. The only thing that really helped me was when I ran across, one day reading the Course, I ran across a statement to the effect that we should learn to think of God as the expression of loving. And I thought to myself, you know, it's easier for me to think of everyone as being an expression of loving. And if I can join with that feeling of their loving, that seems to be about the best I can do to experience the oneness. I had another similar experience this morning when I was, one of the recent lessons that has talked about the love of God and how once we are able to feel the love of God, everything changes. Everything changes as a result of that. And I thought, you know, obviously then I have not experienced the love of God. Mm-hmm. Because here I am still feeling as though something needs to be changed. So I said, this morning in my meditation, I really want to feel the love of God. And I had some very, very nice sensations come, but I knew that it was not what I would call the love of God. So I asked Brother, my last resort always, I never think about doing it first, it's always last. You know, why can't I seem to experience the love of God? And he said, do you at this moment really feel that you are a part of God? And I said, probably not. That's more intellectual, but I probably don't feel that. And he said, until you feel that you are a part of something, how could you feel that it was what you wanted to feel? In other words, the love of God, you must feel that you are a part of God, or it's just something else.
So feeling the love and feeling a part of God are the same?
If we felt, if what he was saying was that if I felt that I was a part of God, then I could feel what I called the love of God. But if I feel that I am a part of the ego, then where is the love of God? It must be missing. It must be something separate.
It's all about separation, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Joe.
It really is.
Yes. Sin and separation, which is the same thing. Mm-hmm. Two sides of the one coin. Maybe we need to ask ourselves if the ego is even capable of making a long-term plan, any kind of a plan, because the ego itself thrives on a constant change. So how could we even credit it with making any kind of a long-term plan? I think what we confuse with the ego plan is constant turmoil. But it is in the moment constant turmoil. I don't think the ego is capable of a coherent long-term plan. But it's interesting how, even given this discussion and recognizing that the ego's plan, so-called, is one of just constant confusion, why don't we choose consciously, more specifically, for the Holy Spirit's plan, for God's plan? I think it has a whole lot to do with this business that he's been talking to us about recently, which is the fear of not being loved, of finally, ultimately discovering that we are right, that we are not lovable. You know, I find myself many times getting lost in my understanding of the Course. And during those occasions when I do, which are frequent, and I go back and ask Brother for some guidance, I always come away with thinking, well, of course that's right. Why didn't I see that? And yet, as I alluded to earlier, it always seems so tempting to want to make my own choices and not to just stop for a moment and say, whoops, what should I do? How should I see this? What does this really mean? When we go through all of these processes of trying to understand oneness, one of the basic truths that I have to start with is that oneness is not a numerical concept. It's not about looking around here and seeing 20 or 25 different souls or seeing just one. The oneness is being the same in the experience and the expression of a loving God. So if you looked at it that there were 20 billion that were expressing that one loving feeling, oneness would be present. It's both abstract and specific. What makes a dog as opposed to a person? Are these creations of God? Are they really the way we see them? Or the way they are? So what makes a dog? What gives it the attributes that is different from another live piece of consciousness? I always found it to be very intriguing to allow myself to speculate as Brother talks to us constantly throughout the Course about things changing when we see them differently. He says, recognize you made this world. This world that you see is not the world of God. This is your world. Because you've made it from the concept of differences, separateness and differences. So, if we were to speculate, what makes a dog, or a horse, or a person, if they are all our creation? We would have to say we do. They're of our own making. So why do we make a dog? Why don't we make everything like we are? Does a dog innately have unconditional love? Or maybe we need it from some dogs, and so we have it. Maybe we need it from some people, and so we have it in our relationships with them. But isn't this just another example of how the world becomes what we choose it to be? The point, I guess, that I'm trying to bring up is, couldn't we do that with anyone? And what keeps us from doing it with anyone? We know that we live with a dualistic, what the Course calls a dualistic mind. We live with a mind that seems to be able to experience both God and other than God. What does it tell us about this character, so to speak, that you're describing, that we have created, that may or may not be able, that may or may not, that cannot admit to being its own creator? What does that tell us about this self, this character self, that seems to be the one who is different from all of the other character selves, and yet who absolutely refuses to acknowledge that he has created what he experiences? Whether we call something a dog, or whether I call it Tom, or Roger, or Teddy, or whatever, what's the distinction that I'm trying to make in all of that? Is it that I can't admit that I have created this so-called scale of differences? I mean, what's the difference between me identifying with the you that I see, the dog that I see, and the Tom character that I see? Different ways for us to deny the reality of what is real. I mean, what could be more explicit than for me to say, I'm not you. I might be the same as you, but I'm not you. It's more obvious for me to say, I might have characteristics like that dog, but I'm not that dog. All of these things that we're talking about are functions of our perception. And our perception has one purpose and one purpose alone in this world. And that is to make differences real. That's why we call it perception. It's not knowing. It's a tool to make differences real. To perceive one thing differently than another. Well, we obviously are not going to find any meaningful relationship between the bodies of all of these things that we're trying to perceive the same. So where will we find it?
Isn't that the rays that it?
Yes, exactly, Roger. That's exactly what it is. And I think we can relate it to frequencies on a radio station. You turn the dial and you go from one frequency to another frequency, and out of this thing comes a different communication. And it's the same with relationships in my mind, with the idea of the great rays.
Excuse me for interrupting, go ahead. What is the purpose that you see for the great rays?
If we don't have great rays, then we have to ask the fundamental question, how does oneness interact with itself?
In fact, couldn't we say that the great rays are the explanation of that?
Yes, that is the explanation in my mind. That's how oneness interacts with itself.
Yes, without differences. The interesting question we have to ask then, is how many ways are there to love? If I talk to God and ask God about creating me as his son, if the conversation wouldn't have to turn to my speaking to him about creating him as my son.
That's where the Course stops us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
The Course itself tells us that's the only way you're different. You did not create.
You did not create yourself.
Well, you did not create yourself, and you did not create the Father. But it also tells us clearly that we create like the Father.
Yes.
And that's the extension. And that when the Father creates like himself, he creates fatherhood within us. And that is the extension of unconditional love. And that is our kingdom. And that is our creations, is that extension.
Does any of this conversation now bring any of you any closer or open up any little spaces in your mind to being able, or being willing, I should say, to consider the possibility that you are one with God? If we can't ultimately create a space of recognizing that we are one with God, how will we ever solve this seeming dilemma of oneness? He's talking about our coming to the awareness that we are all a part of the one creation. And he says, all power in heaven and earth is given you. In other words, we are the creators of everything that we see on earth, and co-creators with him of everything in heaven.
Is there anything other than dissociation that prevents us from seeing that?
No, absolutely nothing. we did not dissociate with God. Where is the duality? Well, as the New Yorker magazine cover that was sent around indicates, because Mr. Trump won, everybody feels bereft. But if Hillary had won, then it would have been exactly the opposite. Because we all have to recognize this was not an election based upon a Hillary Clinton or a Donald Trump. This was the ego's consciousness reminding us where our judgments arise. And it wasn't as though anybody was judging Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. These were the judgments that arrive within each of us. The fears that come to the surface that we all have. And if we would remind ourselves, the cornerstone of perception is projection. Remember that little powerful word, projection? How we each take what's wrong with us, and in order to avoid responsibility for it, project it onto the world. There will be many excuses, I'm sure, for us to judge Mr. Trump or other members of our government. But we all need to sit back and ask ourselves, what is it that we really want? Do we want the effects of our continued projections? Or are we willing to accept the possibility of healing? And then we remind ourselves again, what is healing? What would constitute healing in this case? Is it to continue to judge? That's not going to do anything more than satisfy our egos. Tonight, look inside yourself and ask yourself, am I willing to accept a healing? Am I willing to turn to my God self and say, help us to see differently?
True perception is the word that keeps coming to me.
True perception is not about projection.
No.
But the ego's perception is all about projection. So if you would have it be healing that you prefer, that you are willing to accept, how will our healing occur? How will this country, this consciousness, come together again? It begins with each of us not making those judgments about our neighbor or the guy on the highway or whoever seems to offend us, but choosing instead to simply say, there, by the grace of God, am I. When you look at the overview of what seems to have happened, can you not see the divide, the split in the consciousness itself, not just about this silly election, but about everything that goes on? What's the nature of our perception? It's dualistic. Everything has an opposite. So here we have one candidate who wins more popular votes than another candidate who wins the Electoral College. And we're saying that isn't fair. Just look at all of the opportunities we have to change the way, the vision that our consciousness has. But I want to suggest that the place it's going to begin, as strange as this may sound, the place that it's going to begin is when each of us looks inside and says, do I want to blame more than I want to heal? There will be that temptation, believe me. It's there now. That's what we're witnessing when we're seeing all of the demonstrations and so forth. That is the choice. Do I want to blame? Is that more satisfying? More than I want to heal? And if we answer that one question, the healing is done. Because we all know what it is that we really want. Our perception is simply the mirror for how we see ourselves. And the world then becomes the beneficiary of our projecting that self-image forward. When you look at the overview of what seems to have happened, can you not see the divide, the split in the consciousness itself, not just about this silly election, but about everything that goes on? What's the nature of our perception? It's dualistic. Everything has an opposite. So here we have one candidate who wins more popular votes than another candidate who wins the Electoral College. And we're saying that isn't fair. Just look at all of the opportunities we have to change the way, the vision that our consciousness has. But I want to suggest that the place it's going to begin, as strange as this may sound, the place that it's going to begin is when each of us looks inside and says, do I want to blame more than I want to heal? There will be that temptation, believe me. It's there now. That's what we're witnessing when we're seeing all of the demonstrations and so forth. That is the choice. Do I want to blame? Is that more satisfying? More than I want to heal? And if we answer that one question, the healing is done. Because we all know what it is that we really want. I mean, what is the first lesson? In fact, it's not even a lesson. It's the overview of what the Course teaches. What are we told?
Yeah, nothing real can be threatened.
Nothing real can be threatened.
Yeah.
Nothing unreal exists. It does very clearly, though, bring to our conscious awareness what our life is all about. Because suddenly we had something, some event, that seemed to impact us immensely. So it's a good opportunity for us to step back. Say, wait a minute, what is it that I'm really looking at here? What opportunity do I really have? And believe me, it's all going to begin when you ask yourself the question, do I want to continue judgment of anything about this for any reason? Or am I committed to wanting it to heal? Once you begin with the premise that there is something wrong, once we feel there is something to be fixed, we're going to find everything that we looked at that falls into that category. We have to begin with the premise, all is well. We are the consciousness that makes all of this happen. Every part constitutes the whole. This is a concept that is very difficult to understand. But even if you look at it from the point of view that we are part of it, or that being a part of it, we are all of it, it still defines what your life, what your experience is going to be. And that's the choice, that's the big choice that we each have to come up with now. So what shall we do? From here on, what shall we do? We've just been talking about the different possibilities, different ways to see. What shall we do about it?
Love ourselves and understand that we've never been anything but innocent.
Is it if you love yourself, it's never a question about loving anyone else. You automatically do, because love sees only itself.
We want unity, but we're still not ready for unity.
It's nice to be recognized. It's nice that we do recognize that, because we have been witnessing this happening all over the world for the last 25 years, except that now it's becoming more definable. We here in the United States, well, first of all, the people in Britain had the opportunity to do that with the Brexit thing. And then now we in the United States are having a beautiful opportunity to step back and say, wait a minute, this isn't, incidentally, this isn't about people who are afraid that they're not going to be able to have health care. And this isn't about raising taxes on the wealthy. This isn't about any of that. This is about each of us looking inside and asking ourselves very simply, am I willing to be healed? Am I willing to trust love? Or do I wish to still continue to listen to my ego? Once we start to look inside ourselves and say, you know, how do I change myself? Do I change what I am? Can't change that. I can't change that. If I'm not a physical being, what can I change? I can change my mind. I can change the way I see. Let's ask another question now, because this is the one that we would ultimately come to. When we ask ourselves whether or not we are willing to be healed, we are also asking ourselves if we are willing to accept the love of God, because that is the nature of our healing. Are you willing to accept the love of God? Are you willing to accept that God equally loves you and Hillary and Donald and Hitler and every other character that you can think of? And all that's really necessary is for me not to try to block, just to have that thought. I don't need to block the love of God, and let God find a way to come to me. It is a moment that we have the opportunity to make the choice, the only choice that we will ever need to make. And it was brought to us by what looked like an election, contentious election. But it is the moment for us, each of us, to step back from our perception and simply make a choice. Am I willing to be healed? Am I willing to let God in? Are you? Don't be tempted this week. Don't be tempted to fall into the judgments that you're going to hear on the tube, because you want to recognize that they have nothing to do with either Clinton or Trump or anybody else they're talking about. All judgment is self-judgment. That's where it begins, and that's where it has to end. We can do this, dear friends. We can do this because we are the consciousness for which we speak.
Hence the title of John Nagy's book, Ours is the Voice for God.
It is indeed. Okay, is it a deal? So be it. Forgiveness is the thought that what the ego sees happening didn't happen. And that's why it can let go of all illusions. That's why it can do all of these other things, because it simply wipes away the sin that we hold responsible for what our thoughts are, what our entire perception is. See, that's why it's so confusing, because we study it and we understand it, and we say, gee, I would like to have things be that way. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't accepted it yet. And because we haven't accepted it yet, it remains a part of our belief. And as long as it's a part of our belief, that's the way that's the way our world is going to look. It's not so much on a case-by-case basis. Do I have to believe this all of the time? It's accepting the fundamental principle from which all of our perception and all of the things that we see arises. Is sin real or is it not? You see, if I really and truly believe that sin wasn't real, none of those other thoughts would exist. Can love come in as long as I believe that sin is real? And that's why we have what we have tried to understand as a split mind. Because both of these thoughts attempt to live in our mind at the same time. Both the thoughts that we like and the thoughts that we don't like. The only answer that I have ever gotten from Brother, either from reading the Course or from listening to him, is the one that says, if you were to make as much a habit of listening to the God self as you do to the ego self, then your belief would change. But we don't. We have an election like we just had, and how quickly, how easily do we lean into all of that business of hatred? And does anybody listen to Donald Trump and say, oh, Donald, I recognize your call for love? Isn't that the whole agenda of what we've chosen to do? What better way is there? Should we just sit here forever and read about it? Or shall we find the circumstances and situations that show up in our life and say, I think if I want to change this, I better deal with it?
Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
The words of the last few lines in there, honey. What he's saying is not simply to sit with it, but to sit with it. When you sit with it in welcome, you are saying to yourself, I am able to see through the truth of it, but don't welcome it as something that you treasure. But the Course also teaches us that there is a kingdom that we must rule. And that is the gateway to the thoughts that we welcome. In one way or another, welcome them either because we believe them and cherish them, or because we hate them. That's why we can see a call for love.
Yeah.
Would it make more sense if you were to say, whatever arises, love yourself? Just to say, love that, leaves me a little bit empty. If I were to interpret that as whatever comes up, love myself, then if I'm the one who has to make the decision to let it go, then I'm the one who needs to be empowered. And the only thing that can empower me is for me to accept myself, for me to love myself. The biggest call for love that we all miss is our own. Whenever we protest something because it's there, our protest just gives more validity to it being there. But if we can protest from the perspective that there is another way to see it, there is a way to simply make it go away, then there's another alternative. The ticklish part is for us to truly see what it is that we're trying to change. And as Tom pointed out, much of the time, we're not really trying to change it. It would seem that if I said, would you like to let go of sin? Everybody would say yes. What if I said, would you like to let go of separateness? Would you like to let go of the world? Or would you just like to change the world to be a little more accommodating to separateness? The happy dream is when we do let go of the sin. When there isn't anything out here to hang our hat on. And the only reason the world or anything else exists out here is because we need it to be separate from us. If the only thing that were in our mind was the thought of love, would there be anything outside of our mind? I doubt it.
Seek not to change the world. Rather seek to change your mind about the world.
And how do we do it? What is that key linchpin? There it is again. He keeps telling us over and over again. It's the belief that sin is real. How many ways do each of us have to prove to ourselves that sin is real?